Welcome to the Head Shepherd podcast. I'm your host, Mark Ferguson, CEO here at NextGen Agri International, where we help livestock managers get the best out of their stock. Before we get started, thank you to our two fantastic sponsors for continuing to sponsor this podcast. MSD Animal Health is perhaps better known as Cooper's Animal Health in Australia and for their Allflex range across the world, with a comprehensive suite of animal health and management products. Honega is a one-stop shop for wool harvesting and animal fibre removal. The Honega team have a deep understanding of livestock agriculture, backed by Swiss engineering and a family business dedicated to manufacturing the best. We are grateful to our sponsors for their support, helping us bring Head Shepherd to you each week. And now it's time to get on with this week's episode.
Welcome back to Head Shepherd. You're with Ferg. Great to have you listening along, coming to you from the cubby house in the backyard as usual. Really enjoyed catching up with a number of podcast listeners this week as I was over in South Australia for a few days, which was great. Part of the LambX task force, we've met to put the final touches on the program, so it's coming together beautifully. It's going to be a great event there in July 2026. So I recommend as soon as those early bird tickets go on sale, I'd start locking in your accommodation and those tickets and flights and get that locked in as part of your professional development in 2026. We all know when we get off farm, we get exposed to different people, we get to catch up with different people, we learn, we grow, and our businesses benefit from it. And LambX is going to be one of those opportunities to do a lot of learning, have a lot of fun, and really get to celebrate our fantastic livestock industry, but particularly sheep in that case. So, really recommend you getting in along to that. This week on the Hub, we released an article from Sophie Barnes. Sophie, again, has done a deep dive into the science of an aspect of sheep production, and this time it was brown fat in lambs. So brown fat's that energy source when lambs are first born. Sophie's done a really deep dive into what's going on in the biology and why it's important. So, really recommend jumping on the Hub and reading that. Last week's episode on the podcast was about Next Predict. That launch has gone really well. We've had a lot of interest and, really recommend checking out that product. If you're a merino breeder who breeds a few of your own rams, it is really a great product to help you do that with a bit more efficiency. So I recommend you jump on there. This week we're doing a Hub Live all about shedding sheep. So that's tomorrow night. If you're listening to this on Monday, it's Tuesday night. It's or evening, depending on where you are. We've got a whole heap of people coming along that breed shedding sheep or consultants or researching in the area. So it's going to be a great chat around. So if you are in the shedding sheep game, it'll be an opportunity to jump on there and ask you questions of some people who've been doing it for a long time or have really lent into it lately. So recommend you jumping on there. It's going to be led by our Dr. Emma Pettigrew from our consultant in the North Island. I'll be in there as well to make sure we have a few questions flying around, and it should be a really great evening. We're obviously getting 5 or 6 speakers covered in an hour. It's going to be a bit of pressure on. We're probably going to overflow into a bit more time than that, but that's all good. But we'll definitely get all the key stuff done in an hour so people can get on with their evenings. But going to be a really, really great little live event. We're trying to do one of them monthly at the moment, or not at the moment, forever, and live on the Hub. And so if you have got an idea or if you've got a speaker you think would be great on there, we're more than happy to hear those ideas. So jump on and give us an email and let us know. That'd be fantastic. Also, a quick reminder that Georgia Buchholz is going to be at the Australian National Field Days in Orange towards the end of this week. And so our Agri-Futures program around fibre goats is on display there. So really recommend you go and find Georgia if you want to chat anything NextGen Agri, or if you want to chat anything fibre goats. Georgia and the team from Agri-Futures will be there. So highly recommend jumping in there if you're heading to the Australian National Field Days. Also, another quick mention that the Xander McDonald Awards are open for entrance right now. You've got a couple more weeks before they close. So if you or someone you know is doing great things in agriculture, is under the age of 35 and wants to be exposed to one of Australia's best agribusiness networks, then get your entrance form in. There's a winner in both New Zealand and Australia. So make sure wherever you are, if you're in one of those two countries, get that entry form in. I'm fortunate enough to be one of the judges here in New Zealand and love every year going through those resumes and videos of some great people doing great things. It's getting harder and harder every year to pick those finalists and winners. But if you're out there doing great things, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, that's been a really long intro. Lots happening here at Next Gen Agri, and wanted to make sure we reminded everyone of all those things. But we better get on with the show, and it's a great one this week. We have Professor Peter McGilchrist joining us. He is a fantastic educator. He loves meat science. He loves barbecuing stuff. He is an absolute legend of the industry. I actually was fortunate enough to do my PhD with Pete and have been around him for probably since those days, so kind of almost 20 years now, and just seeing how amazing he is at educating the next generation. He lectures there at the University of New England. He's heavily involved in the ICMJ. He's president of that, which is a movement across the global movement really around what's called meat judging, but it's all about educating people around the meat supply chain. And Pete just loves educating people around that eating quality piece. And you might have heard him speak at a range of industry events. It actually amazes me that we haven't had him on the show earlier, and it won't be the last time you hear from him. I'll get right under that right now with Professor Pete McGilchrist. Welcome, Pete McGilchrist to Head Shepherd.
Hey, thanks, Ferg, for having me along today. It's great to be here.
Pete, it's been a long time coming. Can't actually believe it's taken us this long to get you on the show. But anyway, we're here now, so that's all that matters. You're obviously Dr. Meat, and we're going to talk all things eating quality. Before we get into that, it'd be good just to bit about your background. Obviously, growing up there in New South Wales, rural science. Then when we ran into each other over at Murdoch Uni.
Yeah, so I grew up in a little town called Woolabadar, a couple of hours south of Armidale here, or just south of Tamworth in the northwest. And I think my dad was one of the first people in the district to run a crossbreeding program. So I'm an F1, and normally there was line breeding or inbreeding in that region. But so yeah, I'm a crossbred, and I'm the youngest of four. So we ate a fair bit. And yeah, so there was always something hanging in the tree, and I was always fascinated by, the different bits, and we seemed to either chuck it all on the barbecue or all in the oven as a roast. There wasn't much variation from that, but I was intrigued by. Well, I enjoyed eating, as you can see, but I was intrigued by that process of converting muscle to meat, and then how delicious and enjoyable that could be, and nutritious as well. So, we grew a lot. It might be the hybrid vigor, but I think the nutrition had a bit to do with it. Like my brother's 6'6", and I'm nearly 6'3", so and our parents are hardly 6 foot. So nutrition was good. And then came up here to UNE, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. I knew I loved ag and cruised through the degree, but in part of that, I was selected on the Australian ICMJ team, which was looking at carcasses, and we used to do a lot of cattle showing and judging when we were kids, and then we got to carcass judging. It's like so much easier. Take the skin off and you can actually see what's there. You're not guessing underneath this beautifully fluffed up thing, and you're looking at eyelash length and tail length and all those other very important traits. Muzzle width. Yeah. So I got into carcass judging. I was on the Aussie team went to America in my second year, and we kept meeting all these meat scientists, and I was like, so tell me what you do. And they're like, we work on meat quality issues, and we try and make meat better for the consumer. And then we met another couple in Oklahoma, more in Texas, more in Colorado. And I was like, oh my God, there's actually quite a group or a community of you. And so, you bumble through undergrad, and it came back here, and then worked out the head kind of meat scientists who are actually at the university that I'm studying at, developing MSA at the time. It was very early days of MSA in the early noughties. And so, did honours with Tomo, John Thompson, at the time here at UNE, and Graham Gardner. And then, after uni, travelled for a while around the world and came back and worked in a feedlot. That was kind of fun for a while. Got a sore bum and sick of putting antibiotics into cows. I could kill them quite well. And Graham had actually moved back to WA, and he rang me. He's like, I've got just the research project for you. And I said, oh, that's cool. You're still in Armidale. No, I'm in Perth. And I was like, where? And anyway, so that's how I ended up in Perth. And told Mum I was going for 3 years and ended up staying for 10. But it was certainly a great period of life doing a PhD and being in Perth for 10 years.
Yeah, for sure. And that's obviously where we managed to end up being, well, similar enough PhDs. I was obviously playing around in sheep and you were playing in cows, but we were using some similar experimental protocols. So luckily you were going first, so I could learn from your mistakes and we can move from there. But
many bloods were pulled from those catheters, and many hours spent on the auto-analyzer measuring the metabolites in that blood. But you think your PhD is going to define you, but realistically, you're just learning good methods and building your network out, right? And we were pretty lucky in those beef and sheep CRC days to get that network and training through those. Yeah, through that whole system, and also a whole bunch of colleagues like yourself that we keep in contact with throughout our whole careers.
Yeah, no, it's phenomenal timing. And I actually was chatting about that on a previous podcast about those training grounds, and the CRCs were cracking training grounds, and particularly that PhD, relatively dangerous for a couple of days at PhD conferences, but we snuck through. Yeah.
Relatively dangerous, yes. Understatement.
Yeah. Let's talk.
We were fully focused, Ferg, always.
Yeah. Not on anything to do with study, but yeah. Let's chat eating quality, mate. I guess what are we saying when we talk eating quality? What are the things about meat that make it good or bad to consume?
Yeah, so eating quality is quite a broad thing, and I guess we kind of classify it in two ways, and so kind of intrinsic eating quality or extrinsic eating quality. So we'll cover off today on both of those a little bit, but intrinsic eating quality we'll discuss the most is around, the tenderness, juiciness, flavor of the meat. So when you actually put it in your mouth, what do you taste? Do you enjoy it? Is it enjoyable? Whereas your extrinsic eating quality is a whole heap of things that extrinsically affect that eating quality, and that's things to do with how it's marketed. So what breed is it? God, let's not talk about that again. But how was it raised, grain-fed, grass-fed, all the things you see in marketing. Is it carbon neutral? Is it free of hormones? Is it X and Y? So they're all extrinsic factors. What price did you pay for it? What restaurant are you eating at? What Pinot have you paired it with in the restaurant? All those sort of things are extrinsic factors that actually impact on your perception of eating quality as well. And so they're very, very powerful because the brain is probably 10 times more powerful than the mouth. So that's where marketing comes in. So if you get your marketing right and then pair that with product that gives you a really good intrinsic eating experience, then you'll win every day of the week. So in meat science, we really work on the intrinsic side of things, the flavor, the juiciness, the tenderness, more than the extrinsic things. However, of course, they're very, very, very well paired, those two things in giving you an overall eating experience.
Yeah, it is intriguing, mate. And I didn't even expect we'd be going down here, but I did say we'd go off track, and we'll go off track straight away. But it is a phenomenal that you put the different label on something and your brain tells you some different story, and so and obviously that's a massive part of it. You're pretty hot on, when I've heard you talk, you're pretty hot on branding, particularly the lack of branding in lamb, I suppose, and that I guess does keep us in that commodity, chuck it in a box mindset, whereas once you get into brands, there's obviously some intrinsic factors and some extrinsic factors which will have an impact on what our price point we can expect to extract, and therefore the value of the chain. So pretty it's all intertwined, obviously, and good to cover it all off.
Yeah, look, it was pretty exciting postdoc, which is the bit of research we do after we finish our PhD, and we don't know what we want to do yet, or it's the first bit of money we find to do some more research is what we do in postdoc, and my postdoc was around branding with MSA beef. So it was a school of hard knocks. So at that point in time, we MSA graded most beef carcasses. And it was really a method of drafting them. We had a two-way draft, in or out. That was it. And so anything that was dark cutter or high in pH or, was kind of out, and then everything else was in. And so your audience understand normal distributions very well. What you could label on your carton end label is your lowest common denominator in that group. So it's like having a group of bulls at a sale or rams at a sale, and everyone only has to pay the price of your worst indexing ram in that sale. Imagine if that, and that's what we were doing, we're getting to this end and saying, oh, they're all that quality. And so we were showing, we actually had a national system at that point in time to segregate carcasses. And so that these things lead on to each other. But we worked out that it was a very inefficient system at segregating good, better, and best very efficiently. So we had to destruct the national system that we'd created, and then build a system again to allow brand owners to say, okay, I want this quality in my top brand, these other cuts, and this quality in my second brand, etc. So that whole system didn't exist. At the moment in lamb, we're not even at the first part of that, where we're saying, okay, these are out and these can all be in. We're just all in. So we're kind of lamb is lamb, and it's really not. As we say, lamb is lamb, and all lamb's good, but some's bloody amazing. And we're making no dollars out of those amazing ones at this point in time. They're all just getting sold as good lamb. So we've got, we've got some good tar in front of us to go down, and we're like, because our common goal is to extract as many dollars out of our consumers' pockets as we can. Selling amazing lamb as good lamb is not meeting that goal. And so we have to be able to change to help us to extract every dollar we can out of those consumers, because they exist, right? We've seen the rise of premium beef over the last 15, 20 years, and we just haven't got there on lamb yet. But it's there. We know we've found it. There's and I guess there's some people looking at how much volume is there before you start launching a brand. So there's all those sort of things that have to happen before the great brand launch. But there is volume. It's a little bit seasonal sometimes, but it's an exciting period, I think, for the sheep industry going forward in whichever country.
Yeah, because we are seeing obviously a few smoke signals that things are heading that way. We've got a few brands that are getting relatively established in their markets, and I think they are winning on both intrinsic and extrinsic. Like they are winning that game of being able to segregate out a little niche for themselves, which is good. But we're going to see more of it, because I guess I think I'm right in saying that if we look back a couple of decades in beef, it was probably in the same situation. It wasn't segregated up as much as it is now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It definitely wasn't. We had so many ins and outs going on, even at our retail level. But you go into a retail shop now, and I'll use Coles here in Australia as an example, but we've got, Coles Finest, Coles Butcher, and then Drover's Choice. We've got 3 tiers of exactly the same sirloin steak or Scotch fillet or whatever that we want to get, and they're very different price points for those three and qualities, and so they might put a little bit of different extrinsic marketing around those brands, but essentially the top of the normal distribution goes into Finest, the middle or the bulk goes into Butcher, and the tail goes into that Drover's Choice. And so it's a great system to utilize what's there.
Talk us through MSA, Meat Standards Australia, for those that are listening outside of Oz, and which is, I'm assuming, is what's driving that, is ability to differentiate across into those sort of 3 categories, or as examples. So talk to us about what are the sort of factors that results in an MSA grade of good, bad, or otherwise.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work here in Australia since kind of 1997 or 1998 on developing the model. And the sheep model started about with the CRC in about, well, it was maybe a bit before that, but 2004 or 5. And that model has only just been kind of launched out there into the commercial space. But what it is basically it's a prediction algorithm. So like the Bureau of Meteorology predicts today's weather. And we look.
Probably, you might want to choose a different example, mate.
Sorry, they're pretty good at predicting today's weather. So they use wind speed and day length and wind direction and pressure and all those sort of things to come up for you as a consumer of weather data, sunny 22. Or whatever it is in Christchurch where you are. But as a consumer, we don't need
12,
to know.
Mate, only.
Same in Armidale. We can crow today because it's not snowing and -6. It's this is the place, or maybe we both live in places to live when when it warms up. We'll be right in New England. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we digress. So essentially we measure a whole heap of traits on a carcass and then predict eating quality outcomes, and so lots of systems around the world, the Japanese system, Korean system, American system, probably the most well known, are a carcass based system. So they say this whole carcass is, prime choice or select, but in reality, you don't see consumers going into a supermarket and coming out with a carcass over their shoulder saying, "I've got a prime carcass." We go in.
I can imagine you doing that, but not most consumers.
Yeah, that's right. They come out with a meal, right? They go in there like knowing what they want to cook, and then they come out with that meal. So the MSA system is really meals based or cut by cook based, is what we say. So, and we're really trying to predict the quality. If you're going to cook whatever method it is, what quality each of those muscles in the body will be for that cook method. Now, of course, some cuts are way better for some cook methods than other. And one of the biggest descriptors of quality is actually cut. So the biggest variation is within an animal. Between the different muscles, because we have those muscles that do a lot of work and have a lot of connective tissue. So, of course, that the muscle strength of those muscles that do a lot of work is quite tough, whereas muscles like the fillet, just holds the back flat. And so it's a bit like the halfback in a footy team, does very little and very, very tender. And so I don't know what the AFL equivalent is of that, but so it doesn't matter. Old animal, different things. The tenderloin doesn't really get any worse. And you've travelled the world enough to know that in some countries you only eat tenderloin, because who knows what else has happened or what that animal is. So we have this cut by cook based system. So I think that gives us a lot more granularity in terms of being able to deliver the consumer exactly what they want, but for that cook method. And then we take a lot of carcass measures to help us predict those predictions for each cut by cook. So things like carcass weight, rib fat, depth, ossification score, which is like the physiological age of the animal. So basically, as we get older, our muscles get stronger because we've got more connective tissue. We're not much into cannibalism, but your muscles would have been tougher as a teenager than as a toddler, because that connective tissue is increased. Of course, the amount of marbling or that intramuscular fat that's in there. So we at this point in time, our models are really based around things we can see and measure, and then we can put them into an algorithm, and then that comes out with a prediction. Some other big things in Australia we use in beef that you don't have to use in New Zealand is Bosindicus content, which we measure the hump height. There's not too many Bosindicus over there, and also HGPs or hormonal growth promotants. So those two things change the amount of protein turnover in muscle, and so for Bosindicus, that's really important because they've evolved basically on C4 tropical grasses, which are pretty low in energy, and so if you're just burning energy turning over protein, those animals didn't really survive or reproduce. So the ones that did survive and reproduce are the ones that had that slower rate of protein turnover. Same with HGP, slows down that rate of protein turnover. So when they eat the same amount, they grow faster because more of that feed they're eating is going into growth rather than this futile cycling of muscle. So why does the cycling of muscle matter? Because when we harvest an animal, we want those myofibers or the muscle cells to break down, because that's that tenderization process post-mortem. And so in Brahmins and animals with HCPs, that process happens slower. So we use aging as a predictor in the model as well. So anything essentially that impacts eating quality is in this prediction model. And then there's all these interactions between these things like sex, HCPs, carcass weight, etc., that then give us a number for each cut by cook. So let's say for the cube roll, we might have 6 different cook methods for the cube roll, but each of those get a prediction in terms of points out of 100 for each cook method. And then that number is affected by all those inputs that we take on each animal at grading, or comes from the vendor declaration to say, yes, these animals have had HGPs or not. So in sheep, it's maybe a bit simpler because we don't have Brahman sheep. luckily, and we don't have HGPs.
Got a few that look a bit like that.
Yeah, and a few that eat that way too, don't worry. But we can get onto that a bit later. But again, some of those tough ones we see with very high shear force breeding values is probably because they've got slower rates of protein turnover, which makes them grow like anything, but then makes that meat tough. So it's a very similar mechanism, we think, but we've never really looked at the enzyme levels in some of those animals with high shear force breeding values, and high is not where you want your shear force breeding value,
No.
as in positive. Yeah, but sheep is much more simple system because we can't measure ossification because the carcass is not split. So really we're looking at cut, aging, marbling, carcass weight, and fatness or yield.
Just quickly, you run us through shear force. It's a term that not everyone will have had explained to them. So just I guess the method of what it is. I mean, when essentially it's trying to measure whether you can eat it with a spoon or a steak knife, but what's the actual measurement?
So we take a little bit of loin from these animals, and we do a lot of this to put data into lamb plan and breed plan, etc. So we take a little bit of loin, and then it gets cooked for a particular time in a water bath, and that meat's under vacuum essentially in a bag, sealed in a bag, and then we cut. After cooking, we cool it, so it's under the same cooling regime, and then that cooled meat we cut kind of essentially 1 by 1 centimetre strips out of that with the muscle fibre, and it goes into a little machine. That bit of meat gets fixed in the machine, and then this blade cuts through that piece of meat, and on the blade is a weight sensor, and it measures the peak force that it takes to pull that blade through the piece of meat. So a higher shear force means that it takes more energy or more force to cut that piece of meat in half. So, and we measure it typically in newtons. So there's kind of 9.83 newtons per kilo. So let's just divide it by 10. But some like really highly marbled or very tender lamb might be down around 20 newtons, and stuff that we've cold shortened or we're great at doing that to goats in Australia, but that might be up around 130 or 140 newtons. So you can kind of treble or quadruple the shear force by having the wrong processing conditions as well.
And we can imagine that that's our teeth if we cook that
Correct
steak on the barbie or whatever, and then that's the pressure. It's how many times we have to chew that stuff to get it down the gullet.
Yeah, and it's one of the hardest. So it'd be awesome to have a technology to measure shear force in the carcass. But see, what happens during the cooking phase is some of the connective tissue that's, the string that's around your muscles, essentially, that the muscles pull on to then connect to the tendons and connect to the bones to make your movement. That connective tissue, some of it will solubilize or dissolve during the cooking phase. And so the bulk quantity of connective tissue that's in muscle is not a very good descriptor of tenderness. There's an okay correlation, but some of it will break down during that cooking phase, even when you grill it or when you, let's say, boil it for that shear force test. And so it's been a really tricky trait for us to measure with any technologies very, very accurately to date. So, but we'll keep trying because that's that'd be the kind of the holy grail. If we could do that, it'd be awesome.
Yeah, and I guess just quickly, we as an industry, we kind of have got, I guess, mainly because we understand Wagyu and we understand marbling, and that's kind of led our IMF thinking that's what premium eating quality is, and it is. It's amazing stuff, IMF. But obviously, shear force is there's those two. We need to get both of them right to get a good eating experience, plus other stuff, I'm assuming. But
yeah, correct. So the IMF's easy to measure in the abattoir. I say easy to measure. It took us 7 years and millions of dollars to get technologies to be able to measure it. But now we're there.
7, mate. I reckon 20.
Yeah, that's true. I know. Geez, it took a fair bit of effort, but no one gave up, which was the good thing. And so you say shear force is important, and it really, really is in terms of eating quality. On animals with genomics, let's say in the resource flock, there's a positive correlation between IMF and eating quality in the loin and in the top side, and those correlations are around 0.3 to 0.6, so pretty positive. Whereas the negative correlation with shear force is kind of around 0.6 to 0.85. So there's actually a much bigger negative correlation with shear force than what there is a positive with IMF. So we have to pull both those levers.
That's on consumer panel testing.
Yeah. That's the genetic correlation with consumer scores. So, shear force, we can't measure it in the abattoir at chain speed, but it's still important to phenotype and put that data into lamb plan, because we have to take shear force in the right direction, which is down or lower. We can't take marbling on a journey without taking shear force there as well.
Yeah, and I guess we did a pretty amazing job of almost stuffing Australian lamb with the selection strategy that was driving us into high shear force, low IMF. So it's quite lucky that sort of a sheep CRC information was sort of coming out, and all this information was starting to flow in time for us to realise that we were sort of heading towards pork if we continued to make the changes we were charging.
Yeah, absolutely, and I guess that's the beauty of knowledge, right? And so the breeding values, ASBVs for IMF and shear force came out in about 2015 or 2016. And we kind of saw the stem of the flow so shear forces were going up and IMF was going down. That stemmed the flow of that genetic trend in terminal breeds, at least. And then now we've even seen them come back the other direction, now that in all those two traits are in all selection indices, then our meat quality is getting better as the years go on again. So we're bringing shear force down and IMF back up again. I guess the challenge is in countries maybe like New Zealand, where you don't have that information, is you've got no idea what's happening to those traits, right? So it's pretty important to get a handle on that, my belief, because otherwise we're going to produce a product that no one really wants, and it's not a cheap product either. Our red meat is, in terms of yield, lamb is one of the lowest yielding for the volume that we buy at retail. If you buy a fillet of fish, you eat 100% of that fillet of fish, right? No. And that's not a McDonald's fillet of fish burger. But you buy a lamb chop, you're only kind of eating 40% of the weight that you've bought is the red meat proportion of that. And our consumers know that. So we have to offer value beyond just price, and that value, of course, comes in things like your kids will eat it, it's enjoyable, it's nutritious, it's those other values that people put on red meat beyond just price.
Yeah, for sure. I guess if you were to hazard a guess, based on our experience in Oz, what's happening in New Zealand, I'll say it and you can confirm it, but there's a very good chance where the same thing's happening here that was happening in Australia, because our selection strategies are for growth, for lean meat yield, for all the things that we know have a negative correlation with eating quality. So there's a good chance we are driving it out. We do now have our MEQ probes at least getting in a few plants over here, so we're making some inroads, and there are at least one brand here that's working against that. But it's something that's we have to be really careful of as an industry.
Yeah, look, price paid to producers can drive us in any direction we want. And so, ViaScan, a good Aussie invention, was really not taken up here, but taken up pretty broadly in New Zealand. I reckon that would have done pretty amazing things to your shear force, as in send it through the roof. So
by amazing, you mean
by amazing, I mean not for the consumer, but for the growth profile of those animals and yield through the processor. So they got what they wanted, you're right, that higher meat yield. But I think in saying that, it's probably one thing that maybe saves the New Zealand lamb industry a bit from some of those trends is the age at which you kill your lambs. They're so young, and a lot of them are weaned, off mum straight to the slaughterhouse. And in beef, I don't think we've ever done any work on it in sheep in Australia, but in beef, veal, which is anything suckling milk, there's this random increase in eating quality that we get across most cuts The only one that goes negative is the tenderloin because it's got no flavour in veal. But in most cuts, we get this random positive association with animals that have come straight off their mum. So a lot of your lambs that come off mum into the abattoir would be probably, my guess would be probably very, very tender.
Yeah.
And it'd be just those ones that are later. If you're trying to go heavier and older animals, maybe still with their testicles, those things would be.
Hopefully people saw the look in your face when you said that, mate. But yeah, and I guess that is there's lots of combinations of things that we need to think about in terms of like a lot of our ram lambs in New Zealand, and that's obviously got negative consequences for these things as well. If we talk about the physiology of IMF and kind of where it's being laid, or when it's being laid down, and sort of why we shouldn't expect it to be there in a young animal, I suppose, is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, so IMF, if we boil all this kind of eating quality stuff down, especially in sheep, where we don't have any HCPs, we don't have any Brahmins, and if you take those two things out, let's say in the New Zealand beef industry and southern beef in Australia, there's really only a couple of factors that drive eating quality. The rest we can manage after they're killed, like cut can manage after they're killed, how we hang them, we can manage after they're being processed, cook method, those sort of things. So at an animal level, we've really got two major levers we can pull is ossification and marbling. So ossification, the goal there is to kill them at as young a possible age as we can, meeting market weight and fat specs, etc. And then the other big lever we can pull is marbling at this point in time. So that's why there is a lot of emphasis on marbling. It explains about 15% of eating quality, give or take, kind of ranges in scientific papers between 10 and kind of 20. But on average, it's about 15% of eating quality gets explained by marbling. So it is one of those big factors, essentially, easy to measure. It took us a bit of time to measure it on chain speed in sheep, but we're there. And so that's why we do put a lot of focus on it, because it's something we can breed for. Now, we're learning so much over time as we go through genetic selection about how it relates to other fat depots, and also how it's laid down and how we can manipulate that. So, my take on this is that if we put focus on something, we can change it. It might take a long time, but we can actually change when it's laid down, how much there is, all that sort of thing. And you only got to look at the pig industry where they measure P2 fat, and they've had a negative selection on P2 fat, but let's say positive on reproduction rate, etc. These pigs have literally got a dip in their back where the P2 site is. And so they've selected so heavily for genetics that have just reduced fat right at that one point. So, fat is not controlled. All the fat depots are not controlled by the same genes. You probably know the term better than me about how many, lots of genes have little effects on some of these things. Yeah. What do you call that? Help me out.
Polygenic.
Polygenic. Yeah, thanks. So what do we know about marbling? A lot of the early studies formed the basis of our knowledge, but that kind of told us that maybe it was a late maturing fat depot, and everyone's got these, last to lay down and first to burn off, all these sort of things that we kind of know. Well, I think genetics is throwing all that up in the air, and we can actually do with it what we want. And so in lamb, let's start in beef because it's probably more mature, but essentially we wait till an animal gets almost to maturity, fatten the hell out of them, and then kill them, right? So we've got the maximum amount of marbling that animal will ever have, because as we mature, and you and I are certainly there now, but
sneaking past that.
There's only one. If we have a good holiday, there's only one tissue that lays down, right? It's not muscle and it's not bone. It's only the adipose tissue or the fat that lays down in animals that are mature. So that's an easy way to get an animal fat or put marbling or fill out the maximal proportion of marbling that might be possible in that animal, is wait till they're mature, fatten the hell out of them, and then kill them. And so that maturity curve is really important, because when we're younger, let's say in lamb, these animals are still, what are they, 50% of maturity when they get slaughtered, maybe?
Yeah, yeah, well, yeah.
So their muscle is still getting laid down at a really rapid rate. And IMF is a percentage, yeah? So if muscle goes up by 1% and marbling doesn't go up by 1%, then you're actually going backwards as a percentage of the total tissue that's in that muscle. So to have high marbling while an animal is still growing, the marbling depot is actually depositing at as fast a rate as the muscling depot is. And so these lambs that we're finding with high marbling are actually laying that marbling depot down very early in life, way earlier than we even contemplate measuring marbling in beef cattle. So we've, and I guess it comes to the point of we can select for traits dependent on when we measure them, right? So if we're measuring lambs, so under 12 months of age, most first cross animals or terminal size are measured at maybe 5 to 7 or 8 months, and some of them have still got 7 and 8% marbling. So they're laying that down really, really early in life. Merinos probably get to market weight maybe 8 to 10 or 12 or 11 months, particularly these midget New England very fine wool things. Sorry for any fine wool breeders out of the New England, but we can't get any weight in them for carcass very quickly. But so those animals get a little older before we harvest them, so they're closer to a mature weight compared to those really fast growing terminals. And the cool thing we've seen recently is that if you select for animals that lay down marbling early, let's say in lamb IMF, then you can keep finding them, right? If you keep measuring them, then you keep identifying where they are. And in terms of beef, I think we're actually missing a trick in beef cattle. I reckon there's same thing. If we measured animals, let's say, after 100 days on feed, you'd probably find animals that have got really good marbling then. They're much younger. But at the moment, all the Angus Sire benchmarking project animals, they get fed for 270 days on feed. So they're quite mature. They're fat as Hades. And we measure the kind of the final IMF. But some of them might have that IMF after 100 days on feed. And so I reckon there's a real potential to find these, define a new IMF like early IMF or half mature IMF or whatever you want to call it. But I'm sure there's cows that cattle that lay down IMF earlier in life, but we don't measure it then, so we'll never find them if we don't measure them at that earlier time period.
Yeah, it's really true. And one of the great risks of kind of just reliant on correlations or reliant on what the biology was once, because, as you've stated, like the power of genetics is you literally get whatever you select for, whether it's the eyelash length that you're talking about earlier or it's IMF at a young age. It's 100% lines up with whatever you want to get. It might take a while, but the animals you'll find the weird little biological combination that will get you to the outcome you're after, which is pretty interesting. But if we don't look for it, we never find it, which is an important bit. You mentioned cold shortening and goats in particular, and I'm assuming that's just lack of subcutaneous fat, like they're just chilling too fast. Is that what's happening? I mean, what's outside of, I guess, IMF and shear force in terms of when we send an animal into slaughter, what other ways can we screw up its eating ability or eating quality?
Yeah, we can totally bugger up the eating experience from processing onwards. It's particularly in the small stock. And that's one of the best ways is chill them too quickly, or that pH temperature decline is out of the optimum range. Same in beef. Typically, we can't get them cold quick enough because they're so big and got so much thermal inertia and that big insulative layer on the outside. So we get some what we call heat toughening there, where basically the pH of the meat gets quite acidic, so under 6, but the muscle is still very high in temperature. So that basically denatures a few of those enzymes that cause the aging process. and also reduces that cellular integrity. So heat toughening is there in beef. It doesn't have as big a detrimental effect as cold shortening, which we see in sheep and goats. So this is probably one of the biggest achievements of the sheep CRC. Not that it would have got much time in that final book, but the eating quality of lamb in Australia was quite variable in the 90s and early noughties. And that's because there still was a lot of cold shortening around. So what that is basically quick biochemistry lesson in this
Excellent,
podcast. Is that okay?
Excellent. That'd be great, man. I'll start taking notes.
Our pH is pretty neutral when an animal is slaughtered, and we go into rigor mortis, or our muscle becomes kind of fixed in place at around pH 6. Now, if we've all buried something that is a pet that's died of our kids, right? And so typically these days, if it's a bigger animal, you get it and you bunch it all up so it goes into rigor mortis in a nice little ball, and then you don't have to dig as big a hole. But that muscle will fix into final position at about pH 6. And so above that, there's still ATP or energy kicking around. So you can still have a muscle contraction anywhere from pH 7 down to pH 6. What happens when you get or what triggers a muscle contraction to occur in us right now is our brain sends a little electric signal to our muscle. And what that does is actually release calcium from an organelle called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It doesn't matter. Calcium fluxes out into the muscle, and calcium plus energy available allows that muscle to contract. Now, in an animal that's been harvested, there's not many brain signals coming to that carcass at that time. So they've been cut off. But when we get to a certain temperature, the sarcoplasmic reticulum no longer has the power to hold on to that calcium. So at about 15 degrees in lamb and goats, of course, there's biological variation around this, and about 12 degrees we say in beef, the sarcoplasmic reticulum all of a sudden dumps out all this calcium into the muscle. If you've still got energy kicking around, as in you're not into rigor mortis yet, you've got energy and calcium, and you get this massive muscle contraction. And then you run out of energy when your muscle's contracted. So there's all this contraction of muscle, but what that means is the density of connective tissue is now kind of double or treble what it was in a relaxed muscle. So that's what we call cold shortening. And so a lamb, for instance, can go from, let's say, 30 newtons of shear force to 90 or 100. And in goats, about the same, maybe up to 120 newtons of shear force. But essentially, we can totally bugger eating quality because we chill them too quickly. How we fix that a lot in the sheep industry is by putting in electrical stimulation. So it'd be in most plants in New Zealand, but basically that makes the muscles contract, which the muscle still thinks it's alive. It doesn't know it doesn't have a head and it's not breathing. It still thinks it's going. So it burns energy. That muscle contraction that the electricity causes burns energy. And then the muscle says, hey, I need to produce more energy, more ATP for the cell. But in doing so, because they're anaerobic, they can't breathe very well either. That muscle cell is now anaerobic, so the lactic acid builds up, which drops that pH down quicker in that post-mortem period. So electrical stimulation drops the pH faster, and that's how we've fixed it in the sheep industry. And the goat industry, because of the way most of it has been sold prior to now, maybe, hopefully, all of it's cut up and diced and cooked for a long period. So the strength of the connective tissue doesn't matter because the way we cook it, that connective tissue all gelatinizes and then it's tender anyway. But if we're going to start thinking about, using some of our better goats or farm goats for, Western style grilling, then we really have to get a handle on this cold shortening in our goat industry in Australia, at least.
Awesome, mate. Great. A little bit of biology, biochem there.
Sorry.
Reminded me.
They can skip through that. It's too late now to tell them they can skip through it.
Yeah, that's right. No, I love that. They're all mostly nerds here. Couple of things I just wanted to drill into. You mentioned ICMJ, Intercollegiate Meat Judging, and I think you're the El Presidente at the moment. It's something that you're obviously pretty passionate about, and you're passionate about education generally. You're obviously there at UNE as a prof these days.
Yeah. That happened somehow.
Someone forgot to sign off on it accidentally. That's awesome. But yeah, I guess you're obviously passionate about bringing that next generation of meat enthusiasts in. Yeah, maybe just quickly talk through that competition. And
so ICMJ was started back in the 90s by John Carter, and it was really about, there wasn't many people with bachelor's degrees or with degrees of any sort in the Australian meat industry, and of course to advance an industry we don't need to be all boffins, but the analytics, that business is so professional and needs brain power to advance it and to move into this modern world that we're in, and I guess John could see that from that period of time. The other thing why ICMJ is great is, some people scarily enough can still go through an ag degree in Australia, and I can't speak for New Zealand, but not really see inside an abattoir. And so it's giving people that experience. Doesn't matter where you are in the supply chain, growing grain or growing pasture or genetics or nutrition or anywhere along. We've got to have this focus on the end product, because that's how we all get paid. We're in the food production industry, and so not everyone goes into the meat industry, but at least everyone has now seen, hey, this is what my role is in producing nutritious, amazing food for the world population. And so ICMJ kind of breaks down some of those barriers around processing, and shows them the innovative space that it can be. Because if you think about, beef or sheep processing, you think you just bring an animal in and send it out in a box, but it's so sophisticated, so much technology. So it's showing them the breadth and width of careers that can exist in the processing space, and also, giving them current information about markets and, production issues and anything really. So we have a multi-day conference, workshops and lectures in the morning, workshops in the afternoon, and then the competition these days is really just the carrot to get them there, because students love to compete, of course. Don't tell them, but they're really just there so we can get all this information and show them about the industry, and then they get to compete as well. But we still, through ICMJ, take a group to America every year, which is what I got to go on. Our biggest trading partner for beef and lamb and goat in 2024. Also do an Asian tour to look at some really important trading partners up there in China, Indo, Japan, that sort of thing. So and it's about building networks, not only between the people that attend, because, well, look at us, we're a great example, right? Ag's a small space. We just keep bumping into each other throughout our whole careers. So building networks with industry, but also between the students is one of the other fundamental goals of ICMJ. We do that in a pretty non-threatening and very open and friendly environment. And it seems to work a treat. So I'm president, but have an awesome committee around me, mate. I'm on the big ideas and leave the details. Leave the details to those that can manage that.
And of course, if you ever want to get a job at MLA, you have to do ICMJ. You got no chance at all. So just as if you don't get in that cult, you got no chance. So just as
that's what I was going to say. They call it a cult, and maybe it is because people that do it are indebted to it or enjoy it, and those that are outside are like, what is this? Because it says meat judging in the title. I want it to be like Qantas, and we just get away from what the actual letters mean and just call it ICMJ, because no one knows what Qantas means, right?
No. That's right. Yeah.
Queensland and Northern Territory Airline Service, but they're everywhere. So ICMJ is hopefully going to be just more about what it is than the competition.
Yeah. No, awesome, mate. Yeah, but anyone you come across has been through that process is always very passionate about the industry and their part in it, which is awesome.
And it's a good hunting ground for companies as well, because it's extracurricular. They don't have to be there. So, it says, you've got initiative because you took this on yourself to our trainings here at UNE at 6 o'clock in the morning. As UNE, as a uni student, how many 6 o'clock mornings did you see? Not many, other than ICMJ training, right?
A few on the way home, right?
That's about it. So I guess it says something. You've read enough CVs of employees, but people that give up their time in, volunteering, it just says something about the people. And I think ICMJ does the same. They've got off their butt to educate themselves in this, through ICMJ. And it just gives a good message.
Yeah, no, 100%. Mate, we better round this up before we get to the hour, because I don't think we've busted the hour yet. But there's a couple of questions we enjoy asking everybody, and the first one of those is, what's the last thing you change your mind about?
Yeah, I've listened to many of your podcasts, and I've always thought, geez, that's a tricky question, and here I am. And I did. Luckily, you sent the questions through last night. One thing I have changed is a little bit about, all animals have to come to processing, and they go through this layerage period, right? So they come in on farm. Some distances they travel in Australia are huge, and then they get off, and sometimes they'll spend more time at the abattoir in layerage, and then they get killed. And there was lots of people were telling me for years that when we give them a break, because we can only transport animals for a max of 48 hours, and then they have to get off legally and have a break. So typically you never get to that 48. They always do that before. People are saying, well, we get them off and not only give them water, but we give them feed, and that relaxes them and makes them grade better, and all this. Gave me all these reasons why this was amazing. And they're like, well, what's the quality of the feed? And they're like, oh, it's this straw or that straw. And I was like, well, that's not going to do anything, just purely thinking like nutrition and stuff like that. And I've had to eat humble pie, because I said that's not going to do anything. Why would we bother? Like, just give them water. And so this period of, I think hunger stress, we underestimate hunger stress in our animals on the way to slaughter. And, the quality of feed doesn't seem to matter, but the filling them up, recently, that's why I was just saying something I changed my mind about, is we're just looking at some data this week on some truck animals that came in on a truck and a train from the Channel Country in Queensland all the way to Brisbane. And some we got off the train and we left them there for 2 hours and then killed them. And then others we fed overnight and killed them at 6 o'clock the next morning. And now that hay quality was maybe 8 megs of energy, maybe 14, 15% protein. And those things are eating better. The ones we left there overnight are eating significantly better than the ones we killed straight off the train. Mm. And it's not from the nutrition of the feed, but all I can think about is being satiated. Maybe the happy hormones are back or stress hormones are down, but we know that acute stress impacts meat quality, but the reverse might be happening. So happy animals are eating better as well. How we'll ever measure it, I don't know, but I think so that's, I always poo-pooed the idea totally of feeding animals in layering, just said that's a waste of time, don't worry about it. But I'm having to eat my humble pie on that, which is perfect. And that's an opinion without data is just an opinion, right? So I've got some data. I've got some data now to say that my opinion was wrong. We did a sale yard experiment as well, where we sent animals direct from farm to slaughter, and we sent others into the sale yard. Some of them got sold and went straight to slaughter. Others stayed there for a day and went to slaughter. Others stayed for a week and then 2 weeks. And so the ones that stayed for a day, we mixed 4 mobs together and we said, that's going to be our negative control. They will be the worst. They'll fight for that day. They'll eat terribly. And actually in both replicates we did, that mob that got mixed together but got fed for 24 hours before we shipped them to the abattoir are actually eating as well as the control animals that went direct from farm to slaughter. So there's something in this, reprieve from hunger is doing something interesting that we'll never be able to see, but interesting for us to the meat quality. Yeah.
Intriguing, mate. I'm glad we asked that question, because that's a bit of science we wouldn't have heard otherwise, which is fantastic. And I think it's one of our co-supervisors, Graham Gardner, that's basically show me the
show me the peer-reviewed science, and I'll believe you. Up until that, it's just an opinion, and and that's pretty true.
He's still pretty hot on that line. Don't worry.
Yeah. I don't think that's likely to change anytime soon. Which leads us to the last question, which is, who's the best human you've had the pleasure to learn from? And it doesn't have to be guards, but that was
He's got a leg up straight away. Yeah, good one. Like at home, we all lived in the one valley. So the two of my uncles are there and my grandparents were across the road. And I'd say probably I look back on things that really shifted the needle. And, in education, I'm a passionate educator, as you say, and telling stories is what it's about. And that you're good at doing the same thing. And my grandma was a hell of a storyteller. And she always just told these most elaborate stories. The ending was never really, well, it was always good, but the journey that it took to get there, just helped you remember those things. And, in getting people to remember difficult details and stuff like that, being able to put that in a story is certainly a great attribute. And so I don't know whether that's a passed down McGilchrist genetic trait, but I certainly adopted it. I didn't know why I adopted it at the time, but it certainly helped in my career. And there's certainly not as many people that have an impact on your life. And I guess two people we've been fortunate enough to work with in Dave Pethick and Graham Gardner as well have always kept us pretty grounded and also very well supported in the world of science and meat science, and certainly been instrumental in my careers as well in keeping us on track, not chasing too many rainbows, and staying where the data is, and also telling those stories and getting funding and working on things that matter for the industry, not just matter for the sake of knowing things. And I think science done to generate impact for the people that pay the levies is the really important thing. And so those two have certainly taught us all the right things in that aspect.
Mostly the right things, yeah.
The petri dish, let's not mention that. We can always sell a good story at meat quality anyway, eh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Excellent, mate. That's been awesome to catch up, and I knew this was going to be a cracker, which is why I'm amazed it took me 250-something episodes to actually get this one recorded, but I'm sure it won't be the last time we have a chat, and I really appreciate your time, mate, and appreciate all you do for keeping our steak tasting good and our lamb chops tasting good.
Thanks, mate. It's been a pleasure to be on here and have a chat with you as well.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks again to Heinegger, who are proud world leaders in the manufacturing and supply of professional sheep shearing and clipping equipment. Thank you to MNSD Animal Health and Norflex Livestock Intelligence. They offer an extensive livestock product portfolio focused on animal health management, all backed up by exceptional service. We thank both of these companies for their ongoing support of the Head Shepherd podcast.